known as the GAO, which evaluates and audits the performance of the federal government. Basically, that makes Mr. Walker the nation's accountant-in-chief. And the accountant-in-chief's professional opinion is that the American public needs to tell Washington it's time to steer the nation off the path of financial ruin. For good reason, elected officials and political candidates don't like to talk about the nation's long-term fiscal outlook. The subject is short on political theatrics and long on complicated economics, scary graphs, and very big numbers. It reveals serious problems and offers no easy solutions. Comptroller General Walker is sounding the wake-up alarm. In an intensely busy speaking schedule, he is committed to touring the entire nation, talking to anybody who will listen about the fiscal black hole our country is being drawn into, and the demographic tsunami that will come when the baby boom generation begins retiring, and the recklessness of borrowing money from foreign lenders to pay the operations for the federal government becomes a stark reality. His message is an urgently important one, and I want to acknowledge the assistance of Senator Max Baucus in encouraging the Comptroller General to include the University of Montana on his speaking tour, and to thank also our President, George Dennison, for making this lecture series possible. And this lecture will be podcast from the President's Lecture Series website, probably beginning along toward the end of this week. And so it's with a great deal of pleasure and honor that I present to you now the Comptroller General of the United States, David M. Walker.
Thank you, Bob, for that kind introduction. I'd like to thank President Dennison for the invitation to be here with you today. This is the second time that I've been in Montana, but only the first time that I've spent the night in Montana. The first time I came up from Yellowstone National Park and crossed the state line, and believe me, I understand why people speak so highly of this part of the country. It's just a beautiful part of the country and a lovely place to live. Members of the faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. It's really an honor. Lately I've been speaking out quite a bit about our nation's fiscal future. In fact, during the last 2 years, I've traveled to 22 states as part of the so-called fiscal wake-up tour. I've also appeared on a number of major radio and television programs this year talking about our nation's growing fiscal challenge. Some of you may have seen me on the CBS 60 Minutes program, where they did a segment and aired it twice, which has now been nominated for an Emmy Award. And some of you students may have seen me on the Colbert Report. I actually watch Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert every night because I know that's what young people watch. And although I will admit that I watch it the next night, I don't stay up until 11 or 11:30 Eastern time to watch it. The interesting thing is that whether it's 60 Minutes, the Colbert Report, the Diane Reams NPR program, or whatever it might be, the facts don't change, but the messages do, depending upon the venue and your target audience. I'm honored to lead the U.S. Government Accountability Office, also known as the GAO, and at GAO, we're in the truth and transparency business. Or as Stephen Colbert would say, we're all about combating truthiness. We want the real truth, not what somebody advertises as the truth. We're also the investigative arm of the United States Congress, and as a result, we're in the oversight, insight, and foresight business. We speak truth to power, and we try to make government work better and for the benefit of all Americans. In my view, I've always believed that stating the facts and speaking the truth to the American people is important. I've been known as a straight shooter all throughout my career. I was a presidential appointee by Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and Bill Clinton. And I've enjoyed bipartisan support and 3 unanimous confirmations by the United States Senate during my professional career. But I'll tell you, while everybody is entitled to their opinion in America, and we believe in free speech, everybody's not entitled to their own facts. And in fact, in America, especially on television, we have too many fact-free zones, full of opinion, ideological rhetoric, and partisan spin. And so as a result, I think we have to recognize the reality that the facts aren't red, the facts aren't blue. In reality, the facts are colorless, and they need to be transparent. Today, I'm pleased to spend a little time with you to talk about the importance of how we need to keep America great. And I firmly believe that all of us, both individually and collectively, can and should do more to try to help ensure that our future is better than our past. After all, our nation's future is what you and I and our fellow citizens make of it. That's why the Constitution starts with the words, "We the people." From a personal perspective, the Walker family has been in America since the 1600s. But to my knowledge, I'm only the second person in my Walker line to have graduated from college. Before my father, most of the Walkers were mine workers, ministers, or farmers. Despite my family's modest beginnings, I now have the good fortune to be the 7th Comptroller General of the United States and head of the GAO, only in America. From a broader perspective, clearly America is a great country, possibly the greatest in history. We've risen from one of many countries that were, or colonies that were ruled by England, to become the world's sole superpower today. We're the longest standing republic on earth and a beacon of liberty to the rest of the world. Those Americans like myself who have had the fortunate opportunity to travel extensively, and I've been to about 90 countries around the world and all 50 states, recognize that while our country is far from perfect, in general, we have it pretty good today. Yes, Americans have much to be proud of and much to be thankful for. America is number one in many things, but not all things. As a result, we have a right to be proud, but we should never be arrogant. Unfortunately, the world has seen more than a little arrogance from America of late, both domestically and internationally, and this must change. After all, whether we're talking about safeguarding public health, protecting the environment, combating international terrorism, or other matters, the United States cannot go it alone. We're going to have to partner for progress on these and other types of issues which have no geopolitical boundaries. Let there be no doubt, America's true strength is its people. America is a very diverse nation, and our diversity is in fact arguably one of our greatest assets. Yet it's an asset that we have yet to fully capitalize on. While America is a great nation, we face a range of large and growing sustainability challenges that very few policymakers are taking seriously, and even fewer are talking about. In so many areas like fiscal policy, foreign policy, health care, education, energy, the environment, immigration, our infrastructure, and Iraq, we're on an unsustainable path. Our current course is unsustainable in all of these areas. I'll briefly touch on 3 of these to prove my point. First, since America's most valuable asset is its people, I'll start with education. The United States now has the best higher education system in the world. Most of you are beneficiaries of that system. Unfortunately, while we have the best higher education system in the world, we're not even among the top 20 nations in math and science scores at the high school level. This represents a huge problem in a knowledge-based economy, where it's brain power rather than brawn power that drives our economy. If our country expects to maintain and continuously improve its standard of living, we're going to have to do more to stay competitive on measures like savings, investment, innovation, productivity, and product quality. Fixing our K through 12 education system will require fairly radical reform and concerted efforts by all levels of government and by all sectors of our economy. We must move beyond rhetoric and start delivering real results for a broader spectrum of the American population. Second, our nation's fiscal outlook. While short-term deficits are coming down, and that's good news. In fact, for 3 years in a row, our deficits have come down. And obviously, smaller deficits are better than bigger deficits. At the same time, while short-term deficits have come down, we face large and growing longer-range deficits and debt burdens that are going up every day, due primarily to the retirement of the baby boom generation and rising health care costs. The retirement of the baby boomers, of which I'm one, will begin in less than 3 months. The first baby boomer reaches 62 and is eligible for early retirement under Social Security on January 1, 2008. 3 years later, that same baby boomer will reach 65 and will be eligible for Medicare. And when baby boomers begin to retire en masse, it will bring a tsunami of spending that could swamp our ship of state, and yet we are not well prepared. In fact, too many elected officials and others are partying on the beach while the tsunami is headed very certainly to our shores. The fact is that in the coming decades, unless we change our current policies, there simply are not going to be enough full-time workers with the right kind of skills and knowledge to promote strong economic growth or to sustain existing entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Like most industrialized nations, the United States will have fewer full-time workers paying taxes and contributed to federal social insurance programs on a relative basis. At the same time, growing numbers of retirees will be claiming their Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits. Most of today's retirees will live far longer and spend more years in retirement than their parents and grandparents. In a nutshell, the retirement of baby boomers, and as I said, I'm one of them, is going to put unprecedented demands on both our public and private pension and health care systems, and it's something that we've never seen before in the history of this country. At the same time, many American companies are cutting back on their retirement benefits that they're offering to workers. To live well into our golden years, all of us are going to have to plan better, save more, invest more wisely, and resist the temptation to spend those funds before we reach retirement. Do not forget, young people, what Albert Einstein said, that the most powerful force on earth is not nuclear energy. The most powerful force on earth is the miracle of compounding. And if you're an investor, the miracle of compounding works for you. If you're a debtor, the miracle of compounding works against you. And the United States has gone from the world's largest creditor nation in the early 1980s to the world's largest debtor nation today. As a result of known demographic trends and escalating healthcare costs, America faces decades of escalating red ink. The facts on this are not in question. Given our worsening long-range outlook, the government's recent spending sprees and deep tax cuts have dealt a body blow to our long-range fiscal responsibility. Thanks to a combination of increased federal spending, major tax cuts, and an expansion of the Medicare program, federal budget deficits have returned with a vengeance. And the Iraq War doesn't help either. Although the fact is, that's only about $100 billion of our recent deficits, and our operating deficits in recent years have been several hundreds of billions of dollars. And you ain't seen nothing yet, because the boomers haven't retired yet. Depending upon which accounting method you use, for example, the federal deficit for fiscal 2006 ranged from $248 billion to $450 billion, of which Iraq was about $100 billion. While these annual deficit numbers get a lot of press coverage, it's the federal government's mounting liabilities and unfunded commitments for Social Security and Medicare that are the real challenge. Between fiscal 2000 and fiscal 2006 alone, in those 6 years alone, the estimated current dollar cost of those programs, the amount of unfunded obligations for those programs and our public debt, increased from $20 trillion, add 12 zeros to the right of that number, to $50 trillion in 6 years. And this $50 trillion number is going up $2 to $3 trillion a year by doing nothing. Let me put it a different way. Our government has made a whole lot of promises that in the long run it cannot possibly keep. And here's why. $50 trillion translates into an IOU of about $440,000 for every American household. Median household income in America is less than $50,000 a year. Therefore, for a typical family, it's like having a mortgage of 9.5 times your annual income, but no house to back the mortgage. And this burden is outpacing the net worth of most Americans and the growth rate of our economy. Further, the savings rate among U.S. consumers has been falling for some time, and we've returned to savings levels that we have not seen since the Great Depression. In fact, America has among the lowest savings rates of any major industrialized nation. Why does that matter? Because with savings comes investment, with investment comes innovation, with that comes productivity increases, which fuels economic growth, which fuels an improvement in our standard of living. It all starts with savings. Americans are great at spending, whether it be at the federal level or whether it be American families. But too many Americans are following the bad example of their federal government by spending more money than they make, charging their credit cards, taking out home equity loans, building up compound interest, and mortgaging their future. It's one thing to take out debt when it's an investment that you have a reasonable degree of certainty will go up over time. It's another thing to take out debt for conspicuous consumption based upon a want rather than a need, especially given the fact that interest rates are frankly low by historical terms right now, and they're likely to go up over time. Clearly, too many Americans are following the bad example of their federal government, and this is a challenge. It's also a challenge because in the last several years, because we're not saving as a nation, we've had to rely increasingly on foreign investors to lend us money to finance our federal debt. And that might be okay in the short term, but it's simply not prudent in the long run, because debt service payments will go overseas, because others will have more leverage on us, and we will have less leverage on them. And if, for political, economic, or any other reasons, there's a decision not to continue to buy our debt to the extent that they have been in recent years, then we could face a crisis that could suddenly arise. And hopefully we can avoid that. So where do we stand on addressing this issue? Earlier this month, the Congress passed and the President signed an increase in the nation's debt limit. This was the 5th increase in the last 5.5 years. And the current debt ceiling is now $9.8 trillion. And yes, I said trillion. While congressional and public debate on the issue is understandable and appropriate, quite candidly, it's time that we started treating the disease rather than merely debating the symptoms. This country has been diagnosed with fiscal cancer. This cancer can be cured with tough choices, but it will get worse over time if we continue the status quo and if our elected officials fail to act. This fiscal cancer is manifested in large operating deficits and growing long-range fiscal imbalances. It is perpetuated by a lack of meaningful statutory budget controls, a very large and growing portion of the budget that is on autopilot, and a failure to pursue performance-based approaches in connection with major spending programs and tax policies, and a variety of current other practices, including earmarks. These conditions are inappropriate and unsustainable. To help save our future, we must reimpose tough budget controls, tougher than we had in the 90s, which budget controls expired in 2002. We must reform Social Security to make it solvent, sustainable, and secure for current and future generations. We must reform Medicare and Medicaid, as well as our entire health care system, and we must reprioritize, constrain other spending, and separate the wheat from the chaff in the many federal spending and tax programs based upon which ones are working and which ones aren't. We also will need higher revenues over time. We will not be able to close the gap at the current level of tax revenues, but it's important to minimize tax burdens in order to maximize economic growth, maximize disposable income, maximize the amount of the economy that's in the private sector and individual hands, and maximize our competitive advantage as compared to Europe. At the same point in time, in the end, you need to have enough money to pay your current bills and deliver on your future promises. And we're short today, and we're going to get a lot shorter unless reforms come down the pike. The sooner we do these things, the better, because time is working against us and the debt clock is ticking. Fortunately, there are several bills in Congress now that would address the issue of fiscal sustainability and intergenerational equity, that would create a commission or a task force to help set the operating table for the next president and the next Congress to start making tough choices. And the sooner they pass these bills, the better. The third sustainability challenge, and last that I'll touch on, deals with health care. But first, it's important to understand that many young people think that Social Security won't be around when they retire, but they're wrong. It will be, but it must be reformed, and hopefully sooner the better. Our real problem is Medicare, Medicaid, and health care in general. And this is the last of the three sustainability challenges that I'll touch on. While demographic trends are a major contributor to our longer-range challenge, the biggest contributor is health care cost. The plain but simple truth is that our health care system is badly broken. We're number one in the world in health care spending and obesity, facts that don't bode well for our wallets or our waistlines. Health care spending continues to far outpace the rate of real economic growth. Despite spending huge amounts on health care, the United States has above average infant mortality, below average life expectancy, and a much higher than average medical error rate as compared to other industrialized nations. We also have the largest uninsured population of any major nation. It's pretty clear that we're not getting good value for money for our health care dollars. And frankly, if there's one thing that could bankrupt America, it's health care. Comprehensive health care reform will need to occur in installments over a number of years. In my view, we should consider 4 goals. First, provide universal access to basic and essential health care. Second, impose limits on spending for health care at the federal level, because only the federal government can print money and mortgage the future of our country, children, and grandchildren at immoral rates. Thirdly, implement national evidence-based medical practice standards to improve quality, enhance consistency, control cost, and dramatically reduce litigation risk while avoiding heroic measures. And finally, take steps to ensure that all Americans assume more personal responsibility for their own health and wellness. One thing is clear: young people will pay the price and bear the burden if others fail to act to address our fiscal burden and other sustainability challenges, another one being the environmental sustainability challenge. But unlike the environmental challenge, where not only must we do our part, but every other major nation must do their part because we all share the same planet. So yes, we must do our part, but every other major nation must do their part in order for us to be successful. Unlike that, our fiscal challenge was caused by us and can be solved by us if we get serious, and the sooner the better. It's important that young people become more informed and involved in this effort because, as I said, you will pay the price and you will bear the burden if your elected officials fail to act. And the longer they wait, understand the plug is taxes. The longer they wait, the more you'll pay in taxes, because more people will be enfranchised in the status quo, namely the boomers, who will be more politically active, and it will be very difficult to make changes once they have retired in big numbers. So we have a window of opportunity to act in a way that is both prudent and appropriate. Unfortunately, in America today, many institutions and individuals suffer from three afflictions: myopia or nearsightedness, tunnel vision, and self-centeredness. Too many people are focused on the word me rather than the word we. Too many people are focused on what they want today as an individual rather than what we need to do to assure a better future for all of us collectively. And too many people are focused on their own narrow interest rather than the greater good. Furthermore, too many elected officials suffer from mural dyslexia. And for those of you that are not physicians, it means the inability to read the handwriting on the wall. Ignorance, apathy, and arrogance can be fatal when it comes to a nation and its people. The Roman Republic provided us with some important lessons in this regard over 1,500 years ago. Let us not forget, the Roman Republic fell for several reasons, but three seem to resonate today. First, a decline in moral values and political civility at home. Second, overconfident and overextended militarily in foreign lands. And thirdly, fiscal irresponsibility by the central government. Sound familiar? We must learn from history and take steps to make sure that we are the first republic to stand the test of time. In our constitutional democracy, it is we the people who are ultimately responsible and accountable for what does or does not happen in the capitals around our country. As a result, all of us as individuals have a responsibility to be informed and involved in order to make a difference. We must not forget that God put each of us on this earth to serve our fellow man and to make a difference for others. For those of you who are students, those that are earlier in your career, and even those of you that are more seasoned Americans, as I am, as you look to the future, each of you needs to search your head and your heart to decide how you're going to make a difference on this earth. This is one of life's most important decisions. When you search your head and your heart in your pursuit of happiness, don't forget your communities, your country, and your fellow man. To help build a better future, I ask that each of you dedicate at least 2 years of your life to serving others, in whatever way that might be. When you consider public service options, remember that the U.S. government is the largest, the most diverse, and arguably the most important entity on the face of the earth. We need top talent in the federal government to successfully address our many sustainability challenges. Yes, the federal government needs men and women with skills in public affairs, business, and other fields from top universities around the country, including the University of Montana. I also ask that each of you become more informed and involved in the issues facing our nation and be more involved in demanding change and accountability. It's time that we held our current and prospective elected officials accountable for upholding their fiduciary and stewardship responsibilities to our country and its citizens. And let me pause on the word stewardship. As leaders, whether you're in the public sector, the private sector, or the not-for-profit sector, our responsibilities are not just to generate positive results today, not just to leave things better off when we leave than when we came, but to leave things better positioned for the future. And the baby boom generation is the first generation in the history of this great country to be on a path to fail in their stewardship responsibilities, fiscally, environmentally, and otherwise. And this must change. And there's still time to change if we get serious soon. And if we address the biggest deficit that this country has, which is not a budget deficit, not a balance of payments deficit, not a savings deficit, but a leadership deficit. That is our biggest deficit. You may be saying, what can one person do? One person clearly can make a difference in today's world. My favorite 20th century president is Theodore Roosevelt. TR, as he's often called, was someone of character, conscience, and conviction. TR began life as a sickly child, and he lost both his mother and his first wife, and these two losses shook him to the core. He came to the West and this part of the world and fell in love with the terrain and the outdoors and the Western way of life. And candidly, it's easy to understand why. Fortunately, TR recovered to become our nation's 26th and youngest president. TR was an optimist who firmly believed in the potential of government to improve the life of every citizen. As a trust buster, he took on some of the nation's most powerful and ethically challenged corporate interests, and he won. As an environmentalist, he left us the legacy of the great national parks, like Yosemite and others in other national parks that exist in this state. As an internationalist, he led the peace talks that led to the end of the Russo-Japanese War. In fact, TR is the only American to have won both the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Nobel Peace Prize. TR firmly believed that it was every American's responsibility to be active in our civic life. As he said, fighting for the right cause is the noblest sport the world affords. Democracy is hard work, but it's work worth doing. And that's really at the heart of my message tonight. How America looks in the future is largely up to each of us. It's up to you, I, and our fellow citizens who are ultimately responsible for what does or does not happen in Washington. In closing, in addition to reflecting over the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt, I've also been studying the life of George Washington, particularly his 2 terms as president. What's often overlooked is that George Washington was a great believer in fiscal discipline and stewardship. In his farewell address in 1796, Washington spoke to the issue of public debt. He urged the new nation to avoid ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear. This advice is as sound today as it was over 200 years ago. By ignoring George Washington's words of wisdom and postponing difficult policy decisions, Our government is in fact making a choice with unacceptable fiscal, ethical, and moral consequences. We can and must do better than the path of least resistance. The road less traveled won't always be easy, but it's a journey that our children, grandchildren, and future generations of Americans will thank us for taking. I hope that you'll join me in stating the facts, speaking the truth, and acting to help save our collective future. All of you should find your cause in life and fight to make a difference. I'll continue to try to do my part. All that I ask, that you try to do yours to help keep America great. We can, we must, and with your help, we will do what it takes to keep America great, and the sooner, the better. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, David Walker, for those extremely important comments. The Comptroller General arrived here in Missoula late last night. He's put in a pretty heavy day, but he's agreed to take some questions. And so I'd ask you to identify yourselves as you ask him a question, if you have one, and to use the microphones that are there in the aisleways. Are there any questions? Yes, right here.
I'm Katie Evans. I'm a physician and a graduate student as well. I actually have a question about what seems to me to be penny wise and pound foolish as far as infrastructure. We have levees in New Orleans that maybe is an infrastructure problem and ends up creating huge costly issues. Bridges in Minneapolis, Big Dig in Boston. I'm wondering about your opinion on two pieces of this. One is the habit of awarding contracts to lowest bidder. If there's another way to do that, because studies have shown that there is a huge 95% of contracts to the government are underbid to begin with. So that's the first one, if there's any way to change that. The second one has to do with, it seems to me that sometimes we allocate funds for a project, and even if it's bid at that, and the project is done at that it's done in a way that just is substandard. And then we end up not having the money that we would have to begin with, and we don't have an appropriate finished product. So I just want your take on that.
Well, I'll answer your question, but let me also touch on something that you didn't ask a question on, but is directly relevant. We have a finite amount of resources. And to make the best use of those finite amount of resources, whether they be financial, human, technological, or whatever, you need to have a plan. You need to have a plan that sets priorities based upon value and risk. And unfortunately, in all too many cases, we don't have that. In the case of the levees in New Orleans, one of the reasons that money was not spent on those levees is because directions were given by the Congress to spend money elsewhere on bases that were not based upon value and risk. That's been called earmarks in some circumstances, all right? Now, not all earmarks are bad, but not all earmarks are good either. So we need to be having a plan focused on value and risk. We need to be holding those responsible for managing these programs accountable for achieving results. Now, on the contracting, you can award contracts today based upon something other than lowest bid. You can consider best value, and typically, even in most contracts awards, a significant majority of contract awards, cost is a factor, but it is not the only factor that is considered, and appropriately so. Unfortunately, once the contract is issued on many occasions, there may not be adequate oversight to provide for accountability as it relates to cost, quality, and schedule. And we can give you all kinds of reports on that, that not only deals with domestic challenges, but also challenges, for example, in Iraq. These problems are exacerbated when you have a catastrophic event or an unexpected need, and clearly Iraq and Katrina would fall into that category.
Yes, my name is David Andrews. You phrased the sustainability problems as American problems, and yet many of the issues, environmental, demographic issues, also are faced by Europe, Japan. I wonder what you would be, if you were Comptroller General of the EU or Japan, what would you be saying to your respective audiences?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I am head of strategic planning for Auditor Generals around the world. I'm on the board of the Organization of Auditor Generals around the world, and I fairly frequently meet with senior officials, including heads of states for different countries around the world. And I'm going to be interviewed, I think it's next week, by the Japan's version of the Wall Street Journal. And I was interviewed by the Financial Times recently, which I think most people know what that is, because many of these challenges are shared challenges. And in some cases, other countries are in better shape than we are. In some cases, we're in better shape than they are. In some cases, they're ahead of us on addressing the challenge, even though they may have a bigger challenge to address. And my point is that you need to look at each issue one at a time, and understand whether or not it's something that is a shared challenge and whether we need to address it collectively. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The environmental one, clearly we have to address here and globally. The challenge with regard to social insurance programs, such as Social Security and health care, clearly we need to learn from others. And GAO is doing a lot of work trying to understand what other countries have done. What type of reforms have they enacted in the pension area and in the health area to try to help them deal with their challenges? And in many cases, while their challenges may be greater than ours, they're ahead of us in starting to deal with the challenges. Not in all, but in many cases. And so yes, let's learn, let's share knowledge to maximize the chance we can make the same positive decisions and avoid making the same mistakes.
Hi, my name is Chase Maxwell. I'm a junior at Hellgate High School, and my questions are primarily about healthcare in the United States, but around the world as well. My first question was, do you think that single-payer healthcare is a sustainable institution, not only in the United States, but countries around the world who have embraced the system? And do you think that politicians are being realistic when they advocate the implementation of single-payer healthcare programs in their respective countries?
Most countries don't have single-payer healthcare systems, even ones that people say they're single-payer healthcare systems. The government may have a single-payer system, but there are other payers other than the government. For example, in most countries with national health insurance, private sector employers, for their management officials and their highly skilled and knowledgeable workers below the management levels, have private insurance plans that cover their workers in order to give them access to institutions they otherwise might not get access to, in order for them to avoid long waits, and in order for them to be able to gain access to certain types of physicians or technologies that otherwise they may not gain access to under the government-sponsored system. So first, there really aren't that many single-payer systems as advertised. Secondly, from a cultural standpoint, while I believe very strongly that we need to have universal coverage for basic and essential services, which I'm happy to answer a question on if somebody wants, while I feel very strongly we need to have that, I think it's unrealistic to expect that there will be a government-run and administered program for all Americans. I think government has a responsibility to make sure that all Americans have basic and essential, and that they have an opportunity to have more if they want guaranteed insurability at group rates, But we also need, as a government, to recognize the difference between broad-based societal needs, which we need to define and meet, and unlimited individual wants, which will bankrupt us. And I don't think we've had that discussion and debate yet in healthcare, and it's real important that we do, because if there's one thing that could bankrupt us, it's healthcare.
My name is Jennifer Elliott. I'm Vice President of the University of Montana Forensics Team. I'm wondering if you believe there is actually a debt ceiling in truth. From a viewer's point of view of the federal government, they act as though money is illusory and financing could go on forever and unlimited. Do you feel like that's the truth, or do you think there is eventually a ceiling?
Well, first, there technically is a debt ceiling limit, a point at which the government is not authorized to borrow. But I think people make a bigger deal out of the debate over that than they should, because the alternative of not increasing the debt ceiling limit is the default on our debt, which would have disastrous consequences on our credit rating, and we would end up paying a lot higher interest rates, which would compound not only our budget problems, but economic problems and interest rates for the rest of, other aspects of the economy. So I think we spend too much time debating whether or not to increase the debt ceiling limit, when in reality, there's no question we're going to do it, because the alternative is absolutely unacceptable. We spend not enough time debating what are we going to do to keep from having to increase the debt ceiling limit every year or so, which is what we're in the habit of doing now. And that's where we need to spend more time and effort. Our biggest problem is not our current debt. Right now, our debt's about $9.1 trillion. And some people say, well, gee, let's just inflate our way out of that to make it a lesser burden. Well, as we all know, inflation is the cruelest tax of all. It affects us in many other ways. But our real problem is not our current debt. It's the 40+ trillion in unfunded promises that are going up faster than inflation and faster than the growth in the economy. That's the real problem. And you can't inflate your way out of that problem, because those costs are going up faster than inflation because of the design of the programs.
My name is John Saul. I'm on the faculty at the School of Journalism here. You mentioned the leadership deficit. 3 questions on that. 1, why is there a leadership deficit? And number 2, do you see any hope for an end to that in 2008? And 3rd, have you ever considered running for office yourself?
Okay, why is there a leadership deficit? Because of myopia, tunnel vision, and self-centeredness, because people are focused on trying to generate positive results today, because in the political arena, we have something that you could debate whether the Founding Fathers intended. We have career politicians who want to get reelected all the time and stay in the same job year after year after year. We have a situation where people are hesitant to say things or do things that are not universally popular. There's only 2 ways that you get dramatic and fundamental change. Only 2 ways. Number 1, a crisis. Or number 2, leadership. We'll get the former if we don't get the latter. We will get the former if we don't get the latter. And you need to understand that Washington is a lag indicator. It is the most removed from the people. It tends to act when it has to act. When there's a crisis, or when others fail to act, where the people demand action. It's a lag indicator, all right? The people haven't gotten to the point yet where they're demanding action. And frankly, one of the reasons that I'm out speaking out to people about this is to help them start demanding action, so that the politicians will understand that they may actually be able to make tough choices without losing their job, because most of them want to keep their job. Now, as far as 2008, I think 2008 is critically important. I don't expect the issues that I'm talking about to be major issues, the fiscal issue to be a major issue in the primary campaign, because there are other here and now issues that people are more concerned about, Iraq, immigration, whatever it might be. I think it is incredibly important that the issue of intergenerational equity and fiscal responsibility, or put them whatever order you want, be one of the top 3 priorities of the next president. If it is, I think we can turn things around. If it's not, I'm concerned. Now, when I say fiscal responsibility and intergenerational equity, I mean budget controls, Social Security reform, healthcare reform, tax reform, separating the wheat from the chaff between which government programs are working, which ones aren't. And it's a multi-year effort. It may be a 20-year effort, but we need to get started now. I've been recruited to run from office from time to time, but right now I have a good job. Yeah.
Yes, Eric Rolship, I'm a financial advisor. You spoke of the window of opportunity. Can you define that a little bit more in terms of the time frame here? And then the follow-up question is, if the changes are not made in this window of opportunity, what do you feel, in your opinion, are the direct ramifications?
Sure. Well, let's talk about some of the risk factors, okay? First, the first baby boomer is eligible for early retirement on Social Security January 1, 2008. Second, Medicare Part A turned negative cash flow this year. Social Security surplus starts declining in 2009. Medicare Part A trust fund goes dry 2019. Medicare turns negative cash flow 2017. All the tax cuts are set to expire in 2010. These are a few of the key decision points, or a few flashpoints, if you will. I think the real risk that we face is not the things I just mentioned, as far as what's going to be a compelling action. I think the real risk that we face is, since over 75% of our new debt in the last several years has been purchased by foreign investors, that if they decide, for a matter of diversification and prudence, or if they decide for political reasons or whatever, that they no longer want to buy our debt at the same rate they have been, then we'll have to pay higher interest rates in order to attract capital to finance our excess consumption. And if that happens, then obviously there's a ripple effect that occurs, not just on a fiscal basis, but on an economic basis that we'd have to be concerned about. That's the highest risk. As I said, we don't face an immediate crisis, but we have been diagnosed with fiscal cancer. And just like with real cancer, you can cure it. You can cure it if you dramatically, change your behavior, and if you engage in, take advantage of some of the technologies and other things we have. We can cure this, but you can't solve a problem until you admit you have a problem, and you can't solve it until a majority of the people believe that it should be solved, and the sooner, the better.
I think we'll take one more question, but before we do, just in regard to the last comment that the Comptroller General made, this is a huge problem and a daunting problem, but certainly not one without a solution or solutions. And there are several organizations and groups that have been forming to try to take some action in regard to this federal budget deficit problem and the entitlement problems. And one of the foremost of those organizations is the Concord Coalition. And the Western Regional Representative of the Concord Coalition is here with us this evening. She's here from her office in Sacramento, California. Along with the Brookings Institution and the Heritage Foundation, the Concord Coalition has sponsored a series of what's called the Fiscal Wake-Up Tour, a series of public meetings that have occurred all over the country, and Comptroller General Walker has been the principal speaker at most of those. At all of them, he says. And so this is a really an important thing, and I think the fact that you're here tonight indicates that you agree with that too. So I'd ask Janet Walker, please, to stand. And if you want to become involved in this, check with her at the end of the meeting and she can help you become involved. One more question.
Thank you. My name is Ray Rochelle. I'm a Missoula citizen. You mentioned, made a reference to Rome and Roman Republic and 3 major areas, which was the moral compass, the central government's fiscal responsibility, and militarily spread too thin. And you made reference to our own country and requirements. And to me, they seemed requirements of biblical proportion. Stewardship, sacrifice, public service for a minimum of 2 years. And it seems that also you made reference to that our moral compass has dissipated. And I'd like to know your opinion about what you're saying, because with those kinds of references, it seems to me much like what happened when catastrophe strikes. We as a people are able to rally and to step up to the plate and to sacrifice and to become good stewards. And so with that in mind, I'm wondering what you're saying, because what you're saying is pretty dismal in my opinion. And what sort of catastrophic episode will have to occur in our country to wake us up as a people and arouse that inner person to come forth in areas of self-sacrifice and good stewardship?
Well, I've been to 22 states plus DC with the Fiscal Wake Up Tour, and if you count speeches like this, which I give, which are outside of the Fiscal Wake Up Tour, I haven't counted them, but I'm guessing I've probably been to 35 or 40 states. And what I found is the American people are starved for 2 things: truth and leadership. I've also found that the American people are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. And if you end up helping them understand the situation, they actually are ahead of their elected officials and are willing to actually recognize the need for change or might be willing to support reasonable change. But I also find that the American people are very distrustful of current institutions, and that, that's why, I believe that while we're going to have more revenues as part of the solution, you need to have tough budget controls in place before you have many more revenues, because how do you know those revenues will be used for an appropriate purpose and not just frittered away? How do you know they're really going to help put us in better stead, for the future? I don't know that I'm directly responding to you. Yeah, some of the things I'm talking are things that they come from history. Not enough Americans study history. Mesopotamia has been around a long time. There's a lot of history in that part of the world that I don't know that we really learned from recently. But I do believe, as you said, this country has faced big challenges in the past. And when the chips are down, it's always risen. It's always risen to meet those challenges successfully. But here we've got a situation that's different. This is not an external threat. This is an internal threat. And this isn't a threat that is imposed on us. It's one that we impose on ourselves. And I think that might make it an even bigger threat. It's kind of like the boiling, the frog in the pot of water. You turn the heat up, and it just gets gradually warmer before you know it, the frog's gone. But the frog doesn't realize it because it's happened very gradually. And, that's kind of our situation now. Is we're so focused on the short term, and our institutions are so focused on the short term, that we need to have a fairly dramatic shift. Last thing I'll say is, I think the biggest challenge that I have right now is not just the leadership gap. I mean, to me, it's pretty embarrassing that in the longest standing republic in the history of the world, and arguably the greatest nation on the face of the earth, we have such poor voter turnout. Incredibly poor voter turnout. And as I said, it starts and ends with we the people. And the last thing I'll say is I've been a member of the Concord Coalition from the beginning, and they are a worthwhile group that deserves your serious consideration. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, David Walker, and thank you all for being here tonight. I too have been a member of the Concord Coalition for several years, and I think it's a hugely important thing. Check with Janet Ryan before you leave. Write a letter to the editor. Get involved. Let's unite as a people and do something about this problem. Thank you.